As you probably know, I like to look at the internet and read different illustrations and different stories on there. And there was one that I read this last week that the more I read it, the more I thought about it. I thought it goes right along with Philippians, the first chapter, and the Apostle Paul, and his constant positive nature, even though he was going through some horrible times, some difficult times. Paul always kept his eyes on Jesus and was constantly praising God for all the blessings that he had. This is what I read on the internet. I thought I'd share it with you. Someone wrote, one day I got into a taxi and we were off to the airport. We were driving in the right-hand lane when suddenly, out of an alley right in front of us, a car came out. My taxi driver slammed on his brakes, skidded, and missed crashing into the other car by just a few inches. The driver of that car stuck out his head out of the window and yelled at us. My taxi driver just smiled and waved at him. So I asked, why did you just smile at him? That guy almost crashed into us and then began cursing at you. That's when my taxi driver taught me the lesson that I now call lessons of a garbage truck. He explained that many people are like garbage trucks. They run around full of garbage, full of frustration, full of anger and disappointment, and the garbage piles up in their lives, and they need to dump it someplace, and so they'll dump it on you. Don't take it personally, said the taxi cab driver. Don't take their garbage and dump it on other people at home, or at work, or in the streets. Just smile and wish them well, and move on. What you pay attention to, what you dwell on, will come out in the very life that you live. I don't want to be somebody that gathers all the garbage of society, and when things go wrong, I can dump it on you, and then you can dump it on someone else. And when I thought about that, I thought about the Apostle Paul over in Philippians, the first chapter, verses 12 through 24. Paul is in prison. He is not having a great time at a picnic. He is now housebound under house arrest, and he is chained now to a Roman guard. And that Roman guard and he are best friends for about 6 hours. And then there's a change. Every 6 hours, another Roman guard comes in and chains himself to Paul so that Paul won't escape. And so Paul is now has a captive audience. He has somebody that he can preach the gospel to. Now, I don't know about you. I've never been in jail. Maybe you have. But it doesn't look like a very pleasant place to be. I visited jails, and I've visited people in jail, and I've asked them, well, how you doing? You know what the response is? Could you call somebody and help me get out of here? I don't like it here. But that's not the way the Apostle Paul was. The Apostle Paul thought, what an opportunity. I have an opportunity now to share with others who have never heard the gospel about Jesus Christ. So he used that as a positive part of his life rather than negative. We get so much negative input in our lives every single day, don't we? Every time we turn around, somebody is dumping on us. Our world, our country seems to be at odds with each other. And I was talking to Dave Rudzant this morning, and he says, aren't you tired of this constant bickering that we see in the news media and see in our world today? I said, absolutely. We need to be people who have a smile on our face. We need to be people who are accepting of one another. And by accepting of one another, learn to realize that everybody has a different opinion. It's okay. We don't have to hate each other because of it. We can go on with this life. But we gather all that garbage up in the news all week long, and then we begin to dump on other people. Let's do what Paul says in Philippians, the 4th chapter, and verse 8. Finally, brothers, now he's talking to the church, he's talking to you, he's talking to me. He might as well say, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Our whole world thinks about anything but good things. Look at the news media. Look at the magazines. Look at television. Look at the movies that we now have. They all focus on the evil things of the world, and that they try to destroy our very character by the things that they teach and the things that they say. Our world is the exact opposite of what Paul's talking about here. So as Christians, what does that tell us? Doesn't that tell us that we need to be a little bit different? No, we need to be a lot different. People need to know who we are by the way we live and the way we conduct ourselves. And even if somebody disagrees with us, we need to be people who listen and take that in and maybe express our opinion. But the truth is, we don't have to fight and devour one another. In fact, Paul talks about that to one of the churches. Don't fight and devour and bite one another and backbite and gossip. That's not how Christians act. So Paul says, whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is lovely, I want you to think on these things. It will change your day. If you got up and memorized this passage and said it every morning when you put your legs outside the bed, just before you stand up, you would have a better day, I guarantee it. Because your focus would be more on the positive and less on the negative. Because Satan's just firing darts at you as much as he can. He's trying to destroy you as often as he can. We have the sword of the Spirit. We have all that armor in Ephesians that the Ephesian church talks about. Those belong to us. So as Christians, we need to be more positive in a world that is not positive. We need to not focus on the negative, but focus on the positive. Focus on the things that are bright and worthwhile talking about. Somebody was talking to me the other day, and I'm telling you, they were just dumping on me. And they were just telling me all kinds of things and how bad the world was and how I should be doing and what would church should be doing. And it was just constantly a barrage. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought about this passage. Dennis, you need to be showing him the positive way, the lovely way, the truthful way. You need to get rid of that garbage and realize that as a Christian, I don't have to think along those lines. I don't have to let that rule me and dominate me and change me. I have something of value that I can share that will last not only now, but throughout eternity. When we think about the positive nature of the church, we're talking about you and I. We're not talking about this building. This building has leaks. As we discovered Tuesday morning when Dennis and I were ready to go up to the Elders Leaders Workshop or Bible study that we have the second Tuesday of the month. Driving along, the more I thought about it, the more I thought, boy, we need to turn around and go back. I don't think that that's just frost leaking out of the roof. I think there's a problem. So this building is not who we are. You and I are the church. How do we treat one another? How do we treat each other? Well, on the Lord's Day, we do pretty good. Hi, how are you? I'm good to see you. Boy, it's sure good. And we got a smile. Things are going good. But as soon as we leave this room, and as soon as we get in our car, especially if you're a young family, what happens? She's touching me. He's looking at me. That never happens in your household, does it? But it happens to all of us because we are beginning to let the world come in and make us focus on the negative rather than on the positive. So the Apostle Paul in Philippians, the first chapter, verses 12 through 13, focuses on the positive. He's talking, first of all, about unpleasant circumstances. Well, that's a nice way to put it. Unpleasant. He could have said a lot of things about what prison was about and how miserable he was. But he said, there's some unpleasant things that are happening to me. Now I want you to know, verse 12, he says, now I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. Wow, what a positive nature. I'm here for a purpose. I'm here for a reason. And no matter what the circumstances are, I can progress with the gospel of Christ. I can tell somebody about Jesus. no matter what the world does. So let me ask you, as we go through this life, how many problems do we have? You ever been shipwrecked? No? I've had a couple close calls out there in the boat with somebody, but never shipwrecked. Never beaten and left for dead. Never stoned to death and go back into the city and preach the gospel some more. I've never found myself in an unpleasant situation where I couldn't get out of, but Paul did. I've never been in prison. So now Paul is in prison, and he's looking at this with a very positive attitude. Listen to what he says. I remember all these trials, and I see that they all serve to advance the gospel. That's the way you look at your life? Yeah, we have troubles. We have difficulties. We have times of grief and times of sorrow. We have times when we just don't feel good. Just feel kind of punky. Somebody I was talking to the other day just said, well, it's just a melancholy day. Man, the sun was shining. I thought it was a great day. So I was with him for a little while. I thought, well, maybe it is kind of melancholy. We can sometimes let the outside people influence us to realize that we have the sun, S-O-N, shining in us. It's not melancholy. It's a positive day. And the Apostle Paul looked at it much the same way. The Greek word for advance here in this passage of Scripture is derivative of the woodcutters that would go through and they would cut out all the underbrush and the small trees so that the army could come through and battle another army. So Paul says in this translation, all these things that have happened to me have resulted in clearing the way so that the gospel might be preached more effectively. All these things are happening to me to clear the way? Being in jail, being miserable, finding that people want to stone me and put me to death, and people hate me for what I preach and what I teach. Look at all the hate and discontentment that Jesus came up against with the Pharisees and those who did not want to acknowledge that he was the Son of God. How did he treat them? Well, he treated them well and tried to show them a way where God was better in their life than their life was right now. Look at verse 13 of our text. As a result, it became clear throughout the whole palace guard and to everyone else that I'm in chains for Christ. How do you think the gospel got to Rome? I believe it was through the Apostle Paul. As I said earlier, he's under house arrest. He is chained down to a Roman guard. He has 6 hours to preach the gospel to him. And obviously, it changed people's lives. Look at chapter 4 and verse 22 of Philippians. All the saints send greetings, especially those who belong to Caesar's household. The gospel got there because of the Apostle Paul being in prison. He looked at it not as a negative, but as a positive. He looked at it as a way and an opportunity to share with people the knowledge of Jesus Christ that they did not know before. So all of the brethren there, and by the way, part of Caesar's palace, I want you to know they send their greeting as well. They're saints now in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Then you go down to verse 14, which is the second positive result here. It says, because of my chains, most of the brothers in the Lord have been encouraged to speak the word of God more courageously and fearlessly. What does Paul say? He says, because of my circumstances, people are bolder now to go and tell their neighbors and their friends. And it meant persecution for them. It meant that they might too be put in jail, or that they too might be put to death, but they were more bold. They were willing to step up and be counted for the cause of Christ. They were willing to say, I know something that you need to know. May I share it with you? I love some of the classes that we've had here before when they just asked open-ended questions. And you would go and ask your neighbor or your friend an open-ended question and then let them answer. Don't correct them. Don't tell them what you think the answer is, but let them answer. And then when you see them again, ask them if they changed their answer. But you know what they'll do? They'll usually ask you, what's your answer? Well, I don't know. Let's go and look and see what the Bible has to say. An opportunity. The door is open. People are willing to now listen to what you have to say because you let them express their opinion and express their things. Sometimes I think we're so busy in correcting everybody else that we forget that if we listen, we may learn something. My wife tells me that all the time. Would you just listen to what I'm saying? Okay, this time I'll do it. And you know, she's usually right. She usually has the right answer. Well, isn't that true of all of us? As we listen to one another, we learn from one another. We're willing to be positive in listening to each other. It changes our attitude and changes who we are. Paul is saying, because of my hardship, the gospel is being proclaimed in a way that wasn't being proclaimed before. He is willing to stand up and to tell others that the gospel is being produced and becoming a part of those Roman citizens. Bob Benson, in his book, See You at the House, I got this little excerpt off the internet, and I thought, this is really good. Because it really made me stop and think, because I've kind of been through this just a little bit. Anyway, Bob says, he tells of a good friend who had a severe heart attack and almost died, but was now on the road to recovery. Visiting him, Bob asked, Bill, how do you feel about your heart attack? Bill answered, well, I hate it. It nearly killed me. Bob asked, would you like to have another one? Certainly not, Bill said. Would you recommend it for someone else? Absolutely not. Bob went on, Bill, now that you're feeling better, do you treasure your life more than you treasured it before? Yes, I guess I do, he said. You and your wife have always had a pretty good relationship, but are you closer now than you were before the heart attack? Yes, he said, I am. And what about your relationship with God? It's a lot closer now than it was before. So would you say that your heart attack made you a better person? And thinking about it, Bill said, yes, I guess you're right. See, even the tragedies in life, the things that we think are just going to destroy us, may be meant for the positive. I don't know what you're going through. I don't know what any of us go through. But I know this, that as we go through them, we have a partner in Jesus Christ. And we have brothers and sisters who share with us. This Tuesday night at 5 o'clock, we're going to have a memorial service here for Ruth Hamlin's daughter-in-law, Judy. Pretty young lady. Died kind of unexpectedly. Had some issues with her lungs. Well, the reason that we're gathering here to do that is to remember Judy, but also to take that hardship and trying to find a positive where we can have an influence on that family. They were Christians at one time, but just faithfully walked away or lost their faith. Now we have an opportunity to maybe bring Randy back and to bring his son and daughter back. Those are opportunities that we are given in this congregation that we can say, oh, another memorial service, another time when it's all about grief. It may be about grief for that family. But do you see the positive nature that we can make in somebody's life by serving their needs, by just listening to them, by sharing with them in their grief and their sorrow, to try to bring a positive influence and a positive light in their life? That's what the Apostle Paul did. This guy that had the heart attack, Bill, he didn't think that his heart attack was so good until he looked back over his life and thought, you know, I'm better because of it. I'm a different person because of that. We can take the most negative things in our life and make them positive. What are you chained to this morning? Are you chained to grief? Are you chained to loneliness or despair? Are you chained to a body that isn't perfectly physically fit? Are you chained to the desires and the things of this earth that have bogged you down? The Bible tells me, Paul tells me, even in those circumstances, I can find the positive. If I'm willing to look for those positives and then use them for the glory of God. As a Christian, everything that I do should be for the glory of God. Everything that I say should be for the glory of God. That's the way that Paul looked at his life. I like the story about John Quincy Adams, who was the 6th president of the United States. He was 80 years old, and not too long before his death, a friend asked, "Well, how is John Quincy Adams today?" And John Quincy Adams replied, "John Quincy Adams is quite well, thank you very much. But the house in which he lives is becoming dilapidated. It is tottering. Time and seasons have nearly destroyed it. It's becoming quite uninhabitable, and I shall move out of it soon. But John Quincy Adams is doing quite well, thank you very much." This body's only going to last a little while. And we can look at all the storms of life, or we can look at the fact that we withheld, we stood up against the storms of life. One day this physical life will be gone, but Dennis is okay today. You can be okay today because of Jesus Christ. You can look at the positive side of who you are rather than the negative side. You can bring in all the things in the world and let it destroy you, or you can look at the positive nature of Jesus Christ. And then Paul looks at one other thing. He was painfully aware of the Jews that put him, the Jewish leaders that put him in that Roman prison. Listen to what he says in verse 18. "But what does it matter? The important thing that is in every way, whether from false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice." In prison. Not a pleasant situation. What did he do there? He rejoiced. He thought, "Lord, I don't know how this is going to end, but I know this, as long as I stay focused on you, it'll turn out for your good and for the better." Corrie ten Boom, in her book, was talking about the Jewish concentration camp that she was in. And she talked about the lice that all of them had. And she said, "I'm thankful for the lice." I read that book. I said, I must have read that wrong. I'm thankful for the lice. And then she went on to say, "I'm thankful for the lice because it kept all of those soldiers from coming in and molesting us. And they wouldn't because we had lice." Thankful for the lice. Positive. Looking at the positive side in a very terrible situation. The Apostle Paul did that very thing. He said, "My future is uncertain." Look at verse 19. "I know that through your prayers and the help given by the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance." I was in trial. If he was found innocent, he'd get to preach the gospel. If he was found guilty, he'd be put to death. But he said, look at what he says in just a few verses later. Verse 21, "For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain." So Paul says, whether I live and stay here, I get to preach the gospel, but that's just okay if I go and be with the Lord. That's what I'm living for. That's the promise that God has made for me. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. I like the Living Bible. It says, to me, living means opportunity for Christ, and dying, that's even better. Well, think about that as a Christian today. And then in verse 22 and 23, Paul says, I'll read it right yet. "If I am to go on living in this body, this will mean fruitful labor for me. Yet what shall I choose? I do not know. I am torn between two. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is far better for us, for me. But if I live, I will be able to praise God with every fiber of my body." Read a story about a young man by the name of Frank. He's an 8-year-old boy. His daddy promised him on Saturday they'd go fishing. He looked forward to that day all throughout the week. Every day at school. It was finally Saturday got there. He had all his fishing gear laid out. Everything was ready. And he got up early in the morning, as you do when you go fishing, and it was raining cats and dogs. I mean, it was just, you just get soaked if you walked outside. So he finally realized when his dad said, "Son, we're not going to be able to go fishing today. It's just raining too hard." Well, being an 8-year-old boy, Frank did what most 8-year-old boys did. Right? Kicked the furniture, he's kicking the dog. He was just in a terrible, grumpy mood. And every time somebody talked to him, he was just, flipping something back to him because he was just angry because he didn't get his way. And finally, about noon, the clouds began to go away. And his dad said, Frank, gather your gear, we're going to go fishing. So they got out on the lake. They caught more fish than they ever caught. That evening, the mother fixed some of the fish and they had it for dinner. And just before they started to eat, Dad says to Frank, Frank, would you say the blessing? And so Frank prayed like this. God, if I sounded a little grumpy earlier today, it's because I couldn't see far enough ahead. Sometimes we just don't look beyond the end of our nose to see what the future holds. The future holds for us everything that God could give us, way beyond what we imagine or what we think or what life will be. It all belongs to us because we've been promised when we're obedient to Him that heaven is our reward. Somebody said, describe heaven for me. So I really can't. I know it talks about streets of gold, but that doesn't get it. It talks about pearly gates, but I don't really understand that. I've seen some pretty nice stuff. But heaven, we will not even be able to describe what's going to be there. It belongs to us, and I can't tell you what all heaven's going to be, but I'll tell you what, if God made it, I want to be a part of it. How about you? But if you're here this morning and you're not in Christ, you haven't begun the journey. Why not take your life from the negative and look at the positive nature of God and the positive nature of Jesus in your life, and not only change who you are, but change to whom you belong. To repent of your sins, confess His name before men, to be buried with Him in baptism, to rise and to walk in a new life. But if you are a Christian and you've just been a gloomy old Gus all the time, and you always look at the negative, wouldn't it be good if you just started today, right here today, to think about the things that are lovely and true and positive? That's what Paul did. Even though circumstances aren't always the greatest, Paul said, I'm looking for the best, not for the worst. If that's where you are this morning and you want to change your life, Jesus invites you to come while together we stand.